I want us to talk about this. Not the camera, but the brand, Fujifilm, and how they pulled off one of the greatest reinventions that you've ever heard of. So, a quick bit of backstory here. In the year 2000, Fujifilm is doing really well. 60% of their sales come from film-related products, 66% of their profits come from film-related products, and globally, demand for film is at an all-time high. In fact, that year, globally, 1.9 billion rolls of film is sold. And then all of a sudden, between 2005 and 2010, everything changes. Fujifilm goes from 155 billion yen in turnover to 33 billion yen in turnover. So an 80% drop in revenue. The demand for film dropped to about 10% of what it used to be at its peak. Now, here's what's quite interesting. We can't tell the story of Fujifilm without talking about the story of Kodak, because these two companies were playing in the same industry, they had the same challenges. And yet, by 2012, Kodak declared bankruptcy. They were about $6 billion in debt. And yet that same year, Fujifilm posted record revenue numbers, more than $21 billion. So what made the difference? How was Fujifilm able to reinvent themselves? These two companies faced the same storm, and yet one seemed to have drowned and the other learned to swim pretty rapidly. So I want to share with you 3 very specific lessons that I've learned from studying the story and the reinvention of Fujifilm. So let's go back in time. Shigetaka Komori becomes the CEO of Fujifilm in 2003. He's about 63 years old at the time, and he inherits a business that is rapidly evaporating right in front of his eyes. But he makes a very courageous decision. He looks at the film business and he decides that he's not going to save it. This sounds obvious in retrospect, but you have to remember that at the time, Fujifilm had spent 70 years building the most sophisticated film production business in the world. They employed tens of thousands of people to bring this process to life. And so the institutional pressure to protect what they had was enormous. But Komori didn't allow legacy to get in the way of building something new. So one of the very first things that Komori does is he tells his team that they have to audit what Fujifilm is really good at. So not what products or services they sell, but what capabilities do they currently have? He understood that we usually define ourselves by what we sell or by what we do, but that the capability layer that exists beneath that is also really valuable and could be used in different ways. So the very first thing he does is he says, well, we need to do an audit on our capabilities. What are we really good at doing? And as it turns out, making photographic film is one of the most technically demanding manufacturing processes that you can think of. It requires you to take 20 different layers and compress it onto a single membrane, with each of those layers being 1 micron thick. And the chemistry here requires that you understand collagen and antioxidants and nanotechnology. And so by the time they were done with this audit, they had cataloged 200,000 chemical compounds that could be used in different industries. And one of the first industries they move into is skincare. Because as it turns out, the collagen that you find in film is the same as the collagen that exists in our skin. The antioxidants that prevent fading on photographs are the same antioxidants that prevent wrinkling and aging. And the nanotechnology they use to disperse chemicals across film could be used to stabilize skincare products. And so as a result, they launch a company called Asterlift. And it sounds like a joke, a film company launching a skincare brand. But this goes on to become an incredibly successful company for them, opening up many new doors. Because as it turns out, Fujifilm actually had the expertise required to launch a skincare brand. This same principle is really true for you and I, that we often become overly identified with the things that we do, or the services we provide, or the products that we sell. But it's often worthwhile to take a step back and just to ask, what are the capabilities? What do I really have at a skill level that I could apply into other industries or into solving other problems as well? And we actually see this across many different reinventions. Garmin had a very similar challenge as well. They realized that they could use their GPS technology across different applications. It didn't just have to be in-car navigation devices. So the second thing that Komori then does really well is he realizes that if you are going to reinvent yourself, you can't just focus on defense. You have to play offense and defense at the same times. And this is counterintuitive from how many people think, because often we want to stabilize first. We want to make sure that everything is just the way it should be. And then we want to go on the offensive, and then we want to start building and focusing on transformation. But in today's world, you can't really do that. I mean, even back then, you couldn't really do it, but today, even more so. And it's a perpetual dilemma that most of us face, that we have to be building for today, but also building for tomorrow. And the reality is that you have to do both at the same time, offensive and defensive. So on the offensive side, he acquires about 40 different companies. He acquires Toyoma Chemical for $1.4 billion. That's his entry into pharmaceuticals. He acquires Sonosite, which is his entry into ultrasound. He acquires Hitashi's diagnostic imaging business, which gives him entry into CT scanners and MRI machines and X-ray systems. And while he's doing this, he's also cutting back on costs. And unfortunately, part of that is restructuring the business. And of course, some people end up losing their jobs. But he realizes that you have to play both sides of the field at the same time. And so as they go through this process of acquiring new companies and unlocking their capabilities, they also find a new revenue stream in LCD screens, because as it turns out, the precision coating technology that is used for film translates directly to the coating that is needed for LCD screens. And today, Fujifilm controls 70% of the global market for LCD protective films. Now, I want to take a quick pause here and just talk about Kodak for a moment, because while all of this is happening inside of Fujifilm, there's a very different story playing out in the world of Kodak. So the story I've always heard about Kodak is that they should have been the biggest manufacturer of digital cameras on the planet, that they actually had that capability inside of Kodak. In fact, they were the first ones to invent the digital camera, and therefore they should have seen this opportunity, they should have pushed it forward, and they should have reinvented themselves as the digital camera company. But that narrative is actually completely wrong in two ways. The first is that Kodak actually became the biggest seller of digital cameras in the US in the year 2005. But that didn't really help them, because they were losing money on each camera they sold. Kodak's business model was always the same as the razor and blade model. You sell the razor for cheap and you make money on the blades. You sell the camera for cheap and you make money on the film. So they actually pursued that, but it just wasn't worth their time. The real insight actually, and number two here, is that Kodak acquired a photo sharing company called oPhoto. But instead of focusing purely on the digitalization of prints, they were still pushing people to go and print film. They were pushing people towards their digital kiosk where they can go and print their photos. And so that was actually their biggest mistake, is they held on to film for too long. Kodak shouldn't have been the mass producer of digital cameras. They should have been Instagram. And the thing that you learn here is that Kodak tried to protect their market, whereas Fujifilm was willing to extend it. Okay, so back to Fujifilm and to the last point that I have on this board around their reinvention. In 2006, Shigetaka Komori walks into a meeting with his leadership team, and he writes one word on the whiteboard, and that word is Shinrai. It stands for trust. It's Japanese for trust. And it wasn't really about trust in the customers or trusting in the market. It was about trusting themselves to go through this process of reinvention. The trust that their identity wasn't tied to a product that was busy disappearing. The trust that 70 years of accumulated expertise in chemistry could be redeployed into other industries. The trust that we have capabilities that could take us into new arenas. The trust that we should be playing offensively and defensively at the same time. He was asking them to trust themselves. The reality is that when we go through a reinvention, there is a lot of uncertainty. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world as it is, but then going through this process of reinvention, you also don't know what's going to happen on the other side. It's all good and well to know that I have these capabilities and they could be redeployed into different sectors or industries, but there are no guarantees. And so I find it incredible that he recalibrates them around this idea of internal trust and conviction. We have to believe in ourselves because no one else is going to believe in you. The world isn't going to hand you a reinvention. It is something that you have to believe you can go through and that you can make work. Today, healthcare represents 33% of Fujifilm's revenue. It's mind-blowing to me. They used to be a company that sold film, but today their largest segment is healthcare. The company in the Netherlands that used to produce 200 million rolls of film every year is now manufacturing pharmaceuticals. Fujifilm didn't fight for their past. They didn't cling on to their past success and their past ego. Instead, they asked, what could we become? The market for film might be gone, but what they realized was that the capabilities that made film possible are more valuable than ever before. This is really one of my favorite reinvention stories that I've told. And if you've made it this far, I really hope that you'll sit down and think about your own capabilities. What are the things that you are really good at that enable you to do what you do? What are the foundational aspects of that, the foundational skills or the foundational attitudes that you bring to the table that all compound to deliver a certain service or product? And realize that you can renegotiate where those skills and capabilities are deployed. And because of that, you get to reinvent yourself over and over and over. What a great story. I'm going to go test out this camera and I'll see you again soon.